Okay. Bava Kamma Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. So we're almost done with Bava Kamma, actually. We started in the beginning of the year. It's been 12, 13 shiurim Bava Kamma, and then we'll go to Bava Metzia B'ezrat Hashem.
Faster than Daf Shui on Sunday.
It is faster than Daf Shui, because I think around a seventh of the Talmud is Agadata, and we don't learn every single Agadah, so it's definitely faster than Daf Shui. Okay. So this is a great story. I'll say that.
Wait.
It's a great story. It gets stranger and stranger.
Yeah.
It includes themes such as murder.
The weirdest is the snake part.
Okay, so yeah, we'll get to the snake, resurrection from the dead. It has some good elements to it.
Why should a snake eat his own tail?
Okay. Yeah, spoiler alert. Don't spoil it. Okay. It's a very interesting story. Basically, we're going to read the story, and then we're going to analyze. There's a lot. We could spend a long time on the story because there's a lot of interesting parts. We're going to talk about two specific aspects of the story and focus on one of them in particular. Okay? We all are familiar a lot of stories in the Talmud about Tanaim, almost like legendary stories, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the cave, or Rabbi Akiva with the 24 years. So here there's a kind of an Agadic story, but about the Amoraim, which I think, at least to me, is a little bit less well known. Okay? So it's specifically about Rav Kahana and Rabbi Yochanan. Let's begin. Bava Kamma Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. The context in the Gemara is about halachot around moser. Right? If someone is going to turn over a fellow Jew to a foreign government, or turn over his property to a foreign government, so there are all these halachot about if you're allowed to stop him and what you're allowed to do. Okay. So there was a certain person who wanted to give the straw of his fellow Jew to a foreign government. Whatever reason, maybe it's not clear why, but he desired to give his fellow's property to the non-Jews. So he went before Rav, and Rav said, "Don't give it to them. Don't give it to them." And he said to Rav, "I'm going to give it to them. I'm going to give it to them." Yativ Rav Kahana kamei de Rav. Okay, Rav Kahana, who was one of Rav's students, or a student chaver kaze. So he was sitting before Rav when this happened. Shamte lekoi mine, and he dislocated the neck of this person and killed him. Okay? Kar Rav ilave banayich ulfu shachvu berosh kol chutzot ketol michmar. So Rav applied on Rav Kahana this pasuk. Your children are fainting, and they're lying in the streets like an antelope caught in a net.
Rabbi, did you find why they didn't cut his
eyebrows?
No, yeah.
We'll get to that. Okay? So Rav says, just like an antelope, once he gets caught in a net, nobody has any mercy anymore. So too, when the money of a Jew falls into the hands of the goyim, so then it's halach liibud. In other words, the way this is understood by Rashi and Mefarshim is that Rav is approving of Rav Kahana's actions. He's saying this guy wanted to take his fellow Jew's money and give it to the goyim. That's effectively that he's never going to get it back. So it's almost like a din of you're allowed to get rid of him. But then Rav continues and this next two lines are what we're going to focus on for the rest of the shiur. Amar le Rav. So Rav said, Kahana, right, which was his name. Kahana, ada idna havo Parsai de lo Kapdi Ashfichut Damim. So until now, right there in Bavel. Okay, so he said until now the Persians were here. And the Persians don't really care to pursue Shfichut Damim too much. So you could have gotten away with this. But now the Greeks are in charge, and they are very worked up about pursuing justice when it comes to Shfichut Damim. Mardin, right? They'll come in, and accuse you of murder. Kum sak la'arad Yisrael. So leave Bavel, go to Eretz Yisrael. And when you're there, accept upon yourself not to ask Rabbi Yochanan any shilas or question him for 7 years. We'll talk about why, okay? So Azal, so he listened to his Rav, okay? He listened to Rav. So he went to Eretz Yisrael. Ashkechel Reish Lakish. Okay, and he found Reish Lakish. Di'ativ v'kam esayim etifta diyom l'Rabbanan. So he found that Reish Lakish was sitting and he was summarizing what they had learned in the yeshiva that day. Rabbi Yochanan was the Rosh Yeshiva. In this story, Reish Lakish is summarizing what Rabbi Yochanan was teaching in yeshiva that day. So that's what he was doing. Amalu Reish Lakish heicha. So after he left, so Rabbi Kahana came and said, "Where's Reish Lakish?" So Amaru le'amai. So they said to him, Why do you need him?" So Amar lehu, Hai kusha, Hai peruka, Vai peruka. So Rav Kahana right? Who, by the way, Rav Kahana was a big Talmid Chacham in his own right, okay? So if Kahana says, well, I had this question on this question and this answer on the shir that was summarized. Okay, Amarulei l'Reish Lakish. So they went and told Reish Lakish, this guy, Kahana, came and asked us all these questions about the shir. So Azor Reish Lakish, Amarulei Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish went to Rabbi Yochanan, and then he said to him, Ari alami Bavel, a lion has come up from Bavel, Lain marbe mitifta dil machar. So before Rabbi Yochanan, before you go give shir tomorrow, know it really well, because this guy showed up, he's going to ask you a lot of questions, okay? So Reish Lakish is kind of giving Rabbi Yochanan fair warning. What happens the next day? Limachar otvoy bedar kama kamed Rabbi Yochanan. So the next day, Rav Kahana sits in the front row of the yeshiva. Right here in the classroom. We'll see in a second. There were 7 rows. Rav Kahana sat in the first row, and Rabbi Yochanan was in the front of the classroom teaching. Amar shmatata. So Rabbi Yochanan said a halacha v'lo akshe, and Rav Kahana did not question or ask anything about it. Shmatata v'lo akshe. Rabbi Yochanan said a halacha, and Rav Kahana did not question it. Why didn't Rav Kahana question it? Because Rava told him not to question Rabbi Yochanan for 7 years, right? So anchate achore shava dare ad otve bedar bator. Each time that Rav Yochanan asked a question, and Rav Kahana did not question it, they took Rav Kahana and they moved him back a row, until he ended up in the back of the 7 rows. He was all the way in the back. Okay. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shimon besh Lakish Arisha Amarta Nasa Shu'al. So Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, this lion that you spoke about that came from Bavel, he's a fox. Meaning he's not this big Talmid Chacham. He's not so special. So Amar, when Rav Kahana heard this, so he said to himself, Yehera avad hane sheva dare livo chiluf sheva shnin d'amar li Rav. So he said, may it be your will, Hashem, that these 7 rows that my honor was offended by, that I had to move, I was moved from the front row all the way to the back row because I was silent. May that take the place of the 7 years that Rav told me I had to sit silently in the face of Rabbi Yochanan's shiur, right? And so therefore now I've fulfilled that.
That's totally cheating.
That's totally cheating. Good. The Maharsha also wonders, how he's allowed to do that. We'll see that in a minute, okay? So he says now, right, I've fulfilled my promise. Kam akare. So he got up. Amar le nedar ma'baresh. And he said from the back of the classroom, Rabbi Yochanan, start over. Amar shmatata v'akshe. So Rabbi Yochanan said halacha, and Rav Kahana asked a question. Okme bedar Kamma. So they took him and they moved him up a row. Amar shmatata v'akshe. Again, Rav Yochanan's teaching asked a question, and Rav Kahana asked a question. Was teaching asked a question. Rav Yochanan have yativ ashva bistarke. So when Rav Kahana got all the way up to the front row, so Rabbi Yochanan was also sitting on 7 mattresses, okay, in the front. Each time Rav Kahana asked a question, Rabbi Yochanan, out of respect to Rav Kahana, would remove one of the 7 mattresses from under himself. So this kept happening, that he kept teaching halacha until Rabbi Yochanan was sitting on the floor. Right? He kept removing the mattresses until Rabbi Yochanan was on the floor. So then what happens? Rabbi Yochanan gavra savahav. Rabbi Yochanan was very, very old. Umesarche gvine. And he had eyebrows that were incredibly bushy. Okay? Amar lehu daloli einai ve'echezeh. So he says to his students, pull up the hairs of my eyebrows so I can see this guy. This whole time, his eyebrows were so bushy, he wasn't able to see what Rav Kahana looked like. So he said, get the hairs out of the way on my eyebrows so I can look at him. Dalule b'machalta dechaspa. So his students came with these silver brushes on poles and kind of lifted up his eyebrows from his eyes so that Rav Yochanan could see. Chaza deprita siftove. And he saw that Rav Kahana had a cleft lip. Right, the cleft lip, his lip was split. It was
stuck to this part.
Yeah, there's this birth defect. I think is kind of when your lip is stuck like this. In any event, he had an issue with his lip that it didn't look normal. Okay, Svar achoche kamchayich be. Rabbi Yochanan thought that Rav Kahana was smirking at him and mocking him, because Rav Kahana had been asking all these questions and stumping Rabbi Yochanan until Rabbi Yochanan's down on the floor. So he looks for the first time at Kahana. He sees Rav Kahana's lips are kind of shaped in this way that he thinks he's kind of making fun of him. Okay? Chalash daite. So because of that, Rabbi Yochanan got offended. V'nach nafshe. And because of that, Rav Kahana died. Okay? Limchar amar lehu Rabbi Yochanan Rabbanan. So the next day, Rabbi Yochanan... Yeah.
Rabbi Yochanan died?
No, Rav Kahana died. I know it's confusing because who's being talked about. It's clear from the next it's Rabbi Yochanan. Yeah. So Nechar Amaru Rabbi Yochanan the Rabbanan. So next day Rabbi Yochanan comes back to yeshiva, and he said to them, "Chazitu lebavlai heche avid." He said, "Do you see that Babylonian guy how he was making fun of me, that he was smirking at me?" Amrulei darkei hachi. They said, "No, that's just what he looked like. He wasn't mocking you. He just looked. That's who he was." So when Rabbi Yochanan realized that not only had he been offended wrongly and accused Rav Kahana wrongly, but that Rav Kahana had died apparently as a result of that, so he needed to make things right. Al gabe me'arta. So he went to where Rav Kahana had been buried. So chaza dehava hadr le'achna, and he saw that a snake encircled the cave where Rav Kahana was buried, and its tail was inside of its mouth. It was kind of encircling it so that he couldn't get inside. Amar le'achna achna ptach pumach. So he said, "Snake, snake, open up your mouth, v'kanis harav etzel talmid," so that the rabbi can go visit the student. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan, can go visit Rav Kahana, v'lo patach, and the snake refused. V'kanis chaver etzel chaver, let the colleague go visit the colleague, v'lo patach. V'kanis talmid etzel harav tachle. But when Rabbi Yochanan said, let the student go visit the master, then the snake let him in. Okay, Baal rachamei v'okmei. And then Rabbi Yochanan, of course, davened and resurrected Rav Kahana. So he says, if I had realized that that's just what you looked like and that you weren't mocking me, I never would have gotten offended. So I'm sorry that that it led to this, that it got to this. So he said, let the master come back to the yeshiva, and let's go back to what we're doing. Let's learn. Let's talk. All's good. So Amalei of Kahana, who was just revived, said to him, which is a great line. Rav Kahana says, if you can guarantee that I'm not going to die again, then I'll come back with you to yeshiva. But if not, I'm not coming. Right? It's kind of similar to with Purim. What? With Rabbi Zera, right? That he kills Rabbi Zera on Purim when he gets drunk, and he says, right, and he says, come back, well, let's do Suda again. He says, I don't know. So it's the same idea. I don't know if I want to come back. If you get so offended from my cleft lip that okay. He says, it's local yomi tuchishni. So same idea. Taire okme. So he, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but he got him to kind of really get up. Shaile kol sveka dehavele upashtinhu nihale. And then Rabbi Yochanan asked Rav Kahana every suffix that he had, and Rav Kahana was able to answer and explain all of his svekot. V'hainu dam Rabbi Yochanan dilchon amre dilhoni. This is a phrase that comes up elsewhere in Shas. There's a statement of Rabbi Yochanan that which I thought belonged to you, like students of Eretz Yisrael, it really belongs to them, the students of Bavel. As Rabbi Yochanan was the representative of the Torah at Eretz Yisrael. But he's acknowledging that there's a chokhmah to Bavel that was missing from Eretz Yisrael, as Rav Kahana demonstrated. Okay, so this is the Agarata. There's a lot, obviously, that could be said about the story. I want to focus tonight on two statements that Rav makes in the beginning. The first is
mistakes.
Two things that he said, not mistakes. So the first thing is that he says to Rav Kahana, until now, the Persians have been in charge, and they don't care too much about murder. But the Greeks, they care, so you got to run away to Eretz Yisrael. So what's he talking about? The second thing he says is the thing about 7 years. Right? Don't question Rabbi Yochanan for 7 years. So I want to talk about the second thing first, and then we'll go back to the topic about the Persians. Okay? So what's the significance of the 7 years, and why is Rav telling Rav Kahana that he's not allowed to question Rabbi Yochanan? So the Maharsha asks that question. He says, Dehainu delo tikshi Rabbi Yochanan sheva shnin, shehen me'eser shnotav shel adam. So the Maharsha says, right, 7 years is a tenth of a person's life. Shehen shivim shana, right? Like in Tehillim. So a person lives on average for 70 years. V'che'ilu me'ayom katan shenolad dami ad zayin shnin shigel lishnot ha'peutot sheyavo ktanim az lichlal dahat. So he says basically when someone's born until they reach 7 years old, they don't really yet have da'at in terms of being able to really learn and to ask questions and to understand things. Once they're 7 years old, then they can start really learning Torah in a proper way. Okay, so that's right. That's when somebody reaches the age of 7. Vichlal limud, right? And when they can start learning Torah. Okay. He says that's the significance of the 7 rows that were in the Beit Midrash. שהיו התלמידים יושבים שם שורות כפי מדרגת הזקנה והלימוד. Now, he argues that the 7 rows were ordered based on, age and level of learning. Right, the youngest, least knowledgeable sat in the back row, and the most experienced sat in the front row. כמו ששנינו בין 10 למשנה. We're all familiar with the famous Mishnah. בין 5 למקרא, בין 10 למשנה, בין 20 לתלמוד. And so he says here, there's actually 7 different categories in that Mishnah of milestones in your life that you reach when it comes to limud Torah. Right, and he says, Shehem Shiva Madrigo Lefi Hazikna V'Alimud Ad Ben Shivim Seva, until it says when you reach 70 you've reached Seva. Shia Madriga Ha'Elyona. Right, that's the highest level of learning and knowledge that a person can reach. So basically, he argues you can map those 7 phases of limud Torah in that Mishnah to the 7 rows in the Beit Midrash. To the people all the way in the back were like Ben Chamesh LaMikra. The second row is Ben Eser LaMishnah, and so on until Ben Shivim Seva in the front row. Okay. So what does the Maharsha achieve by explaining it this way? So when Rav Kahana was sent to the back row, it was as though he was now someone who was a newborn, as it were, in terms of his limud Torah. He was reset. So he says the fact that I was sent back all the way to the back row, that should act as a substitute for the 7 years I wasn't supposed to question Rabbi Yochanan. Why does that make sense? Because for the first 7 years of a person's life, they aren't able to really ask the shaylas. Only once they reach the age of 7, they become now someone who's nichnas l'chlal da'at l'chlal limud. So the fact that Rav Kahana was sent to the back row, he says it's as though I've fulfilled that kind of idea of you need to be reset to the age of 0 until you reach the age of 7. Okay, so that kind of explains the connection between how he was able to say, to your question before, Oren, he was able to kind of cheat, as it were, and just go to the back of the row, and that gets him off the hook for waiting 7 years. Okay? Okay, so that's how the Maharsha explains the significance. He also doesn't say this explicitly, but what he's implying is that the reason the Rav told him to wait 7 years is some form of tshuva or humility, or in other words, because even though he kind of got him off the hook for decapitating that guy, but he still needed to kind of do some form of penance, right? So kind of by resetting to the back row or to not question Rebbe for a long time, it was him needing to kind of humble himself and then be able to come back up again. Okay? The Yun Yaakov gives a different explanation for the 7. So he says, where it says, V'kibel alayich shelo tik shel Rabbi Yochanan, the second line on the right side, Efshar dechiven lemispar zeh. What's the significance of the 7 here? לחשש אולי יש בו שפיכות דמים, בשביל שהרג למסור הזה, שהיה יכול להצילו מאחד מאיבריו. Okay, less important for now. ומצינו בשפיכות דמים שנידון לשבט דורות. So he says, what's the significance? When it comes to murder, the idea of 7 generations should be familiar to us. Why? כי דמצינו ברוצח ראשון שבעתיים יוקן קין, right? That Cain, when he killed Hevel, Hashem tells him that, I'll give you that sign on your head. Anyone who call Cain shivatayim yukam. Okay, so this idea of being paid back in 7s has to do with the first murder. So that's the significance of 7. לכן התכוון גם כן למניין המספר הזה לתשובתו להצילו מזין מדורי גיהינום. מבין מרשה. Okay, so the Yaakov says that's the significance of 7. What he doesn't just explain, though, is, okay, that's why it makes sense to say 7. But why does he need to tell... so why does he need to not ask Rabbi Yochanan questions for 7 years? So because you want to say 7, so you could say 7 having to do as a punishment, but he's not saying it. Yeah, it could be as a punishment, which is what maybe the Maharsha was saying, but he actually gives a different reason here, or maybe an additional reason. He says like as follows. If you look at the next source, actually in Sanhedrin Chaf Daled, and then we'll get back to the Yaakov. Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, Mai dichtiv vekach li shnei maklot leechad karati noam veleechad karati chovlim. I think this is Zechariah. So he took 2 staffs. He called one Noam and he called one Chovlim. Noam elu talmidei chachamim sheberetz Yisrael sheman'imin ze lazeh b'halacha. So in Eretz Yisrael, people, when they're discussing Torah, they're pleasant towards one another. Aval Chovlim, but the Chovlim elu talmidei chachamim shebebavel shemechablim ze b'halacha. Right, when they go into the Beis Medrash, they're fierce and they're aggressive in their arguments. So it's, in Bavel they were acting like Israelis, and in Israel they were acting like chutznikim. Okay. Vayomer ele shnei bnei. No, you don't like it. Okay. Vayomer ele shnei bnei Yitzchak. Amdim megomer v'shnayim zetim. Okay. Yitzchak Amar Yitzchak elu tamid chacham sheretz Yisrael shnochin zel hazeh balacha. They're pleasant towards each other when it comes to halacha. Keshemen zayit. V'shnayim zetim aleh elu tamid chacham shebebavel shemirurin zel hazeh balacha kezayit. That the students of Eretz Yisrael are compared to olive oil, and the students of Bava are compared to olives. That olives are bitter and olive oil is pleasant. Okay, so the Yun Yaakov takes this idea and applies it back. He says, going back to the Yun Yaakov, he's here lebezel fi she'atalmidim shebebavel mekarin mechablim shemechablim zel lezeh ba'alacha. Ma she'en ken talmidim shebe'eretz Yisrael nochim zel lezeh ba'alacha kedita b'Sanhedrin, as we just saw. Therefore, va'azil lekarta halach b'nimuseh. There's this idea that if you go visit a place, so you should adapt the customs of the place you're going to visit. If you go to a karta, you should do the ways of the karta. In other words, the reason Rav told Rav Kahana, don't ask Rabbi Yochanan questions for 7 years, has nothing to do with the fact that he killed the guy. It's just that, because in Eretz Yisrael, you don't just show up and start asking a lot of chutzpah questions. That's not how they learn. Right? You have to be pleasant. You have to be nice. That's how they do it in Eretz Yisrael. Work your way up. Build a reputation. Then you can't come in and start asking all those questions. It's not Bavel. It's Eretz Yisrael. So that was a nice idea, huh?
When in Rome.
Speaking of Rome, we're getting to Rome, actually.
And the fact that he went to the seventh row, he was like, okay, now I'm humbled.
Right.
I can work my way back up to be on par.
Okay, good, yes. So it actually works nicely with the Marasha. Yeah. Good. Okay, so we dealt with the 7. Now I want to deal with the previous thing, which will take us through the rest of the shiur. When Rav said, until now the Persians were here, they didn't really care about Ashpichut damim, but now we have the Greeks who care about Ashpichut damim. So there's a couple problems with this, but one problem, just to set the historical context, right? In Bavel, which is, you had the reign of the Archimedes, how are they called? Koresh, right? Cyrus the Great. He established the Archimedes Empire, which lasted until Alexander the Great's Archimedean. Thank you. Lasted until Alexander the Great's conquest, and then there was the Seleucid Empire, which was Greek, for about 100 years. Then the Parthians came for 400 years, and then the Sasanians came for another 400 years until Islam, the conquest of Islam. The Amoraim, who lived in this story of Kahana Rav, they lived right after the Sasanian Empire began. The Sasanian Empire started. I checked this. It's something I just noticed. I don't know this b'shlof. It started in around 220 CE, right? And these Amoraim, they lived around 250, 300 CE. And there's stories of Shmuel and Rav that they were friends with Shvur Malcha, who was the second king of the Sasanian Empire. Okay, so it's right after this new. But the Sasanians were Persians par excellence. They were the Persian Empire at its height, and they were Zoroastrians as well. So they worshipped. It was a dualistic, theology, and they had fire, which we're going to see shortly. Fire is a big part of Zoroastrian ritual. But what's clear is that this was a Persian period that they lived during, of the Persian Empire. So what is Rav saying when he says, until now we've had Persians who don't care about Ashpichut damim, but now the Greeks are here and they care about Ashpichut damim. The last Greeks that ruled in Bavel were the Seleucids.
Oh, you okay?
All right.
No climbing on the mechitza.
Yeah. Okay. You okay? The last Greeks that we had, were the Seleucids, which were 400 plus years earlier. Okay, so to understand this, we will look at some examples. First of all, Tosfot and the Ben Yehuda try to answer that question directly. Tosfot referenced this Gemara in Gittin, which let's learn now quickly. Rabba Bar Chana chalash u'legabe Rav Yehuda v'Rabba l'shilo yebei. Okay, so Rabba Bar Chana was sick, and other rabbis came to visit him. While they were there, Atahu Chavra shakla l'shraga mikamayu, and this Chavra, which is a Zoroastrian priest, came and he took the fire away. They had a fire lit, and he came and took the fire, which the Mefarshim say is because the Zoroastrians had this thing where when they were doing their ceremonies, no one else was allowed to have fire lit. Okay, so they came and took their fire.
Around Hanukkah, they also talk about it.
Could be, not sure. So then the rabbi, I think Rabba said,
when they sing Ner Chanukah, then you do it על השולחן, משום הסכנה, and איזה סכנה, and one of them is...
that the Zoroastrians don't let you light fire.
You couldn't have a light in your fire.
Okay, great. Very good. Okay, so here he just seems to put it out. They're not in any danger, but they're not allowed to have it lit. So Amar, so they said, Rachamana o betulach o betula de bar Esav. So he says, and as a response, Rachamana, meaning Hashem, either in your shade or in the shade of the Romans. In other words, anyone but these guys. That's the idea. Like, either protect us, you directly, or at least, better the Romans, right? So Lememar de Romai me'alu Prsai, is that coming to tell me that the Romans were better for the Jews than the Persians were? V'atani Rabbi Chia, ma'ay dichtiv Elokim mevin darka v'hu yadad mekoma, yodei HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Yisrael she'en yocholim lekabel gzerat Romayim, amad v'glal otam leBavel. So there's this other teaching which says Hashem knew that the Jews couldn't withstand an extended period of Roman, decrees and anti-Semitism, so he exiled them to Bavel where things weren't as bad. So doesn't that directly contradict what we just said? So lo kasha ha mikame dineto chabare leBavel ha levater da'ato chabare leBavel. So they went when it was easier in Bavel. That was before these chabare showed up. Once the chabare showed up, then Bavel was even harder than it was under the Romans. Okay, so that's the Gemara in Gittin. So based on this, Tosfot says the following: Kasha l'ri de Bava Kamma de Gittin Amar Bava Kamma chalash al gabe v'chulei Amar Chaman o betulach v'chulei uparich lememar de Romai ma'alei mi Prsai. So mashma she'az adaynu Parsaim beBavel. So what's clear from the story in Gittin is that in the time of Rabba Bar Chana, the Persians are the ones in charge, right? Because they're coming and putting out the fire, and he's saying this whole thing of I'd rather, the Romans than the Persians. So obviously the Persians were the ones in control. So if that's the case, v'lichor mashma she'oto ma'aseh haya achar ma'aseh shebekan. Right, Rabba Bar Chana lived after Rav and Rav Kahana and Rabbi Yochanan from our story. So if the Persians were still around in the times of Rabba Bar Chana, so they were for sure around in the times of Rav, which we know anyways is the case. So what's the question he's asking? How can Rav say, the Persians didn't care about murder, but the Greeks that are near now do? But we see from this other story that it was still the Persians. And we don't really need the Gemara and Gittin. We also know historically, as we said before, the Persians were around. So what is Rav talking about? ואומרי שהשרים והפקידים היו משתנים והיו פעמים מפרסים ופעמים מיוונים. So he gives an answer, take it or leave it, which is, it switched. Sometimes you had Persian rulers, sometimes you had Greek rulers. I'm assuming he's saying here on the local level, perhaps, that there were maybe, even if they were under the Persian Empire, that there were local rulers sometimes, where they were Greek, sometimes they were Persian. It wasn't, and that's what Rav was referring to. Okay? Ben Yoda actually says something a bit similar. He says, So even though they were in Bavel and were not under the kingdom of the Greeks, so it might have been that in that specific province or domain so that they were in, like Rav and of Kahana, so that was ruled by people who were of Greek influence, even though it was under the broader Persian Empire's banner. Right? Okay, so that's their answer.
The big question is why nobody cares about Kahana.
Okay, go on.
No, I'm just saying, it's like weird. Oh yeah, you should run away. Keep learning Torah, it's fine. You just kill someone, it's totally fine.
Right.
It was a holy act.
Yeah, the idea is he was. It's teaching you that if it's a moser, you're allowed to.
Maybe it's actually Eliyahu and Pinchas HaKohen. It became Eliyahu and Avi. It became Kahana.
Kanaim pogim bo. Some of the Mefarshim actually say that the reason Rav sent him there to Israel was not that he wasn't allowed to kill the guy. It was because he did it not in Hatra, not in Beit Din. So he needed some kind of penance, but that he was allowed to do what he did. But yeah, I mean, again, how much of this story you take to be something that mamash kara versus. I think once you get to the snake eating itself and understanding Rabbi Yochanan and him reviving a from the dead, to understand there's broader kind of ideas in this story. But I understand your question. Okay, and just I know we've been a half hour already, but let's just learn. Okay, there's a Gemara in Yoma, which also talks about the Persians and how terrible they were. Aituele dubiel. Okay, this is a crazy Gemara in its own right. I only took the part that's relevant for us, but it's worth learning its entirety. So the context is the angel Gabriel was kind of deposed from his place of authority in the heavens. Okay, so he came back because he wanted to kind of re-establish himself. V'atuele dubiel, and he found Dubiel, which is the name of a Sarah de Parsai. Dubiel was the angel of the prince of the Persians, like Saro shel Esav, the Saro shel Parsim. Ve'okmai b'charikei, and he found Dubiel was doing what he was supposed to do. In other words, Dubiel took Gabriel's job. V'shimesh 21 yom, and he acted in his stead for 21 days. היינו דכתיב, ושר מלכות פרס עומד לנגדי 21 יום, והנה מיכאל אחד העשרים הראשונים בא לעזרני, ואני נותרתי שם אצל מלכי פרס. It's a pasuk from Sefer Daniel. Right? So this Dubiel is acting as Gabriel, who was like this heavenly scribe. So what does Dubiel say? Yehavu le 21 malkei uparvota de mashig. Oh, and they gave to Dubiel 21 kings and the seaport of Mashig. Okay? I'm not sure what the significance of that is. Why mentioning that seaport? Then Dubiel said, Amar, ktivu li Yisrael be'akraga. So Dubiel decreed, Yisrael should have to tax me, to pay me taxes. In other words, the Persians, right? He's an angel of the Persians. Ktavu le. So they said, may it be so, that the Yudim have to pay the Persians taxes. Ktivule Rabbanan be'akraga, and the rabbis also have to pay taxes. Ktivule, and they wrote it. So then what happens? Meanwhile, Gabriel, he goes through some adventures. He's able to come back and try to fight Dubiel. So Ata ashkeche Dubiel, denaked leile igarte biade. So Gabriel came back. He found Dubiel had this decree about the Persians being able to tax the Yudim and the rabbis in his hands. Okay, so Ba lemir mamine. So Gabriel, who's on the Jew side, so he wants to take this decree from Dubiel before Dubiel can finalize it to save the Yudim from the taxes. Bal'a. So Dubiel swallows the decree. Okay. So Ikad de'amr michtav hava ktiva michtam lo hava chatima. So some people say the decree was written but it wasn't signed yet when Dubiel swallowed it. Ikad de'amr av michtam name hava chatima. And others say it was already signed, but when Dubiel swallowed it, it erased the signature, his heavenly saliva. Why do we care? In other words, there's some people in the Persian Empire who get taxed and others who don't. So I guess there was this policy that wasn't consistent in the day, where some Jews and some rabbis had to pay taxes and others didn't. So what?
It sounds familiar.
It sounds familiar. Yeah, Dubiel is at work again. So they're attributing the fact that some of the Jews had to pay taxes and others didn't to this. You have this story.
Some had to go to the army, some didn't have to go to the army.
Video. Some had miluim, some didn't have miluim. It's all Dubiel's fault, right?
No, it's not Dubiel's fault.
Some other malach swallowed the decree and erased half of it.
Dubiel is an angel.
Why did he eat
He didn't like
paper?
what it said.
Yeah, he didn't like. No, he did like what it said, but he didn't want to tear it up.
he didn't want?
He didn't want to tear it up. Okay, so what does this story about Dubiel have to do with anything? So the Ben Yoyada actually takes this story to try to explain what we said earlier about the Persians versus the Romans. Merely, so he said, it seems to me that the Persians are worse, or harsher. Mishum desar sel paras bikesh me'akadosh baruch hu shichtov lo rabbanan bekarga v'nichtav lo. Right? Yeah, because this Dubiel, there were harsh taxes on the Jews. So that's why the rabbis thought the Persians were worse than the Romans. Because he says all of Yisrael and also the rabbis specifically need to pay taxes. That's what we saw. There's machlok at whether it was signed or whether it wasn't signed. And the idea behind this is that the fact that Gabriel was not able to defeat Dubiel in the story, that the Persians have some power that the Jews cannot nullify. Right? That Gabriel can't defeat Dubiel in this. There's taxes. There's nothing they can do. He was able to get him to swallow it so that it's inconsistent. But beyond that, he can't nullify the decree of the taxes. Masha'en ken shlitat Esav. But when it comes to the Romans, al chachamim yesh la bitul. The rabbis have an ability to nullify the decree of Edom. Tiklal gadol beyadenu, from last week's parasha, kasheh kol Yaakov, ene yadayim midei Esav. Right, that if there's tefillah to Hashem to save us from the Romans, there's a special koach that the Yudim have to defeat, bnei Esav. V'lachen me'achar shehem chachamim, chosheshim min hachabarim shem paras yoter min Romaim. So he's acknowledging that the Romans' decrees were harsher. In other words, the Roman decrees were physical danger, that there was persecution, and there was, al panav, that seems worse than these Persians who had religious tolerance, but they made you pay heavy taxes. But he's saying the reason why Rabba bar Chana thought the Persians were so bad, to the point where he said, either Hashem, you, or the Romans, was because he knew no matter how hard he davened, he would never be able to get Gavriel to defeat Dubiel and annul the taxes, or annul them coming and taking and putting out the fire, or whatever it is. Versus the Romans, when they're in control, their power is worse, but also they can be defeated. Okay? That's the Ben Yehuda's claim. Masha'en ken Yisrael otam hamon ha'am, but the average Yehudi, right? She'enoskim b'Torah mevatelet shlitat Esav choshim enem yoter. But the average person is more afraid of the Romans than the Persians, because I'm more afraid that they're going to come persecute me and endanger me and my family than I am about having to pay taxes. Okay?
I go and kill someone.
What?
Oh no, it was the Romans were good for that. Okay.
Yeah, the Romans pursued murder, and the Persians did not. Which is
the opposite. Oh yeah. They did pursue murder. That's what. Yeah.
Right, which doesn't really fit into what he's saying here, but Right. Just the very last point. With this, I'll finish. We've been equating, and it's not our fault. The Ben Yehuda hasn't really. Rashi says it. We've been equating this group called the Chabarim or the Chavraya with the Persians, and we saw the Chabarim were the ones who came and put out the fire. They were like the Zoroastrians, but Tosfot actually questions this. So first, he just has this thing in Yevamot. B'matnita Tana, Elo anshe barbaria v'anshe martinai shemelchin aromim bashuk. So we taught that these people from Barbaria and Martinai, they used to walk naked in the marketplace. Yeah, they were barbarians, let's say. Right? These are really uncivilized people. There's nothing more abominable before Hashem. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Elu Chabarim. No, those people are the Chabarim. So Amrulei Rabbi Yochanan, Atu Chabari leBavel. So when they told Rabbi Yochanan that the Chabarim are coming to Bavel, Shiga Nafal, he kind of teetered and fell over from shock or from fear. Amrulei Mekable Shuchda Taretz Yatev. But then they told him, don't worry, they accept bribes. And he's like, okay, it's fine, we'll be all right. So what's clear from here is that the Chabarim came in the time of Rabbi Yochanan to Bavel, right? So Tosfot says, how does that make sense with the story that we had before about the Persians already being there for a long time? Right? Rashi says that the Chabarim is equivalent to the Persians. This is the Chaldeans, right? These are from the Galut Beit Rishon. That they were before Koresh and the Achaemenidans, or however you pronounce it. Ubater da'atu hainu shekavash Koresh ta malchut umalach beBavel. V'kashel Rabbeinu Tam da'korcha chabarim lav hainu parsim. So he says, based on this, that it can't be that these chabarim are equal to the Persians if you're understanding the Persians to be Koresh and the empire that came after him, right? Da'amar b'perek atzar yuchsin, it says in Kiddushin, harini parsaim domin l'chayalot shel Beit David, harini chabarim domin l'malchei Chabala, which seems to imply that they're different. This is what we just saw. Right? That they only came in the days of Rabbi Yochanan. And he fell over. What does Ri say? The Chabarim hem umah achat sheba b'mei Rabbi Yochanan. That the Chabarim were like this tribe that came to Bavel in the days of Rabbi Yochanan, in the times of the Amorim. And they had a negative influence on the Persians who lived at the time. To the point that the Persians then became even worse than the Romans. In other words, he's trying to align this with what he said back in Gittin, that after the Chabarim showed up, then Persia was even worse than it was for the Romans. Before the Chabarim came, Persia was better than the Romans.
That's why they didn't care about killing people.
Because it was before.
No, because they said, we want to kill all the Chabarim. So we don't care, kill as many as you want. We don't care about that.
Okay.
It's like, we just don't care about murdering,
Because of the Chabarim. Yeah, right. Good. That could be why. Okay, I understand what you're saying. You're using this also to explain, very good, back what Rav said to Rav Yochanan, to Rav Kahana. Whereas the Persians don't care about murder. That's only because the Chabarim showed up. But the Greeks, or the Romans, are not as bad as them, post-Chabarim, and they still care about murder. They're not that bad, right? Yes, good. That would mean that Rav and Rav Kahana must have known about the Chabarim, but they were contemporaneous with Rabbi Yochanan, so it makes sense. Okay, good. Where were we? V'im Tomar, 4 lines from the bottom. Lemai de perish bekuntru to be made koresh ba'u parsim the Bavel, right? And if you're going to say, based on that, what it says in Rashi, that the Persians came to Bavel in the days of Koresh, uve'agozel batu aminan de amar le'Rav Kahana ad העידנא. I think this is Kobe's point. This is what you just said. This is why I brought it. Okay, sorry, I'm remembering now. Aşpichut Damim. Hashta Parsim Ninu v'kapte Aşpichut Damim. Mashma de bimei Rav atu Parsim leBavel. Right, and that would imply that in the days of Rav, the Persians were in Bavel. Omeri dehata machi perusha ad העידנא hav malchut diavne shemoshnim leBavel hayu mivanim v'achshav moshnim shem Parsim v'olam Parsim hayu sham limot Koresh. I didn't say exactly what you said, but I think we can take what you said and actually use that to answer in place of what we said, that the Persians were in control in the days of Rav and Yochanan, but you can say that these Chabarim came, and they were more zealous, or whatever it was, whoever they were, they came and they made it even harder than in the days of the Persians. And it also connects back to Gemara and Yuma about Dubiel, the angel, where actually, if I look now, it talks about just Persians with Dubiel. It doesn't talk about the Chabarim. But anyway, there's clearly something going on here with these Chabarim as opposed to the Persians, and how that influences the story.
Shkoyach
Chaverim. Yeah, the first line in the story, right, is Ahuch Gavra dehave bai achvoy ativna dechavre. The whole context is you being Moser, your fellow, like your chaver. And also at the end, Rabbi Yochanan, when he's trying to get the snake to open up, so he says, let the Rav come to the Talmud. Let the chaver come to the chaver. Well, only later we realize there's also this connection, the Chabarim, which are the Zoroastrian priests. Yeah.
Shkoyach.
Okay.